there's a microphone right there to catch the last gurgles, and Technicolor to photograph the red swollen tongue.
Hey, Vern.
Future events such as these
Angling?
will affect you in the future.
Damn you, Rabbit! You smell like fucking piss!
You're watching The Projectors.
Hell yeah!
A film fan program discussing a variety of movies from history and around the world.
What do you think of this boner I got?
Featuring your hosts, Bob Sham.
When you're Scandinavian, flopping out your mommy milkers is nothing.
And Angela.
If they were just gun perverts, this would be fine.
Party!
Thank you for selecting The Projectors.
I want French pancakes like at IHOP.
And now a preview of our film discussion.
Are you in any pain? Are your parents still alive?
Life is full of surprises.
Hi.
Hello.
It is a new year. New us. We have a new title, Movie Humpers, as you see at the top. We don't really have to introduce ourselves because the intro...
You just called us Movie Humpers.
Did I say Movie Humpers? Fuck.
You said Movie Humpers, as you can see at the top.
Movie Humpers is dead. Long live the projectors. January, our theme is 5 directors, and each week we examine a director's movies from certain points in their career. And for the first week, straight off the bat, I overbooked. I was so busy. The idea is that we record these way out ahead of time, right? So that, like, yeah, you may be hearing it on something on Christmas, but we did it like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
No, the holiday is so fucking busy that I have saddled myself for sake of consistency. We are flying by the seat of our pants with a lot of these. It is the day before. I should have known that, like, the holidays are busy just like they are for every human being. We really should, next year, just take, like, the first 2 weeks off in the new year or something like that.
Yeah.
Or just have a Christmas episode and just be done until, like, the first weekend after New Year's Day.
I like that plan.
And I think we may have to do that because we're just full up and we got too much fucking going on.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing we never mind doing is sitting down and watching a movie. That part's okay.
It is my favorite thing to do.
For week 1, David Lynch's first 3 films, we talked about Eraserhead yesterday. And today we talk about what is one of his more accessible movies, The Elephant Man from 1980, directed by that man.
I just had 2 Cokes, 2 cookies, and a Coke. This is phenomenal.
Written by Christopher DeVore, Eric Berggren, and David Lynch. Based on books written by Frederick Treves, who is featured in this movie, this character, and Ashley Montague, who wrote a book about John Merrick in the early 70s.
They make a really big point at the end of the movie to say that this has nothing to do with the stage play that they eventually happened.
No, we're not associated.
Don't even compare us to the stage play.
It's like it was saying, stop it.
Before you start.
It stars Anthony Hopkins, John Hurt, and Bancroft Freddie Jones, amongst others. Cinematography by Hammer horror veteran Freddie Francis. I don't say the producers much, but it's notable here because it's produced by Jonathan Sanger and Mel Brooks. Now, Mel Brooks took his company is in the credits, Brooks Film or whatever the fuck, but he didn't want his name on it because he didn't want people to come in and think it was going to be some spoof.
That totally makes sense.
But Mel Brooks was a major key in helping to get this shit made. Cost $5 million, made $26 million. And this movie felt like almost like an educational film. This seemed like the kind of movie that I never saw it. They never played this in school growing up, but this was a movie that you could have played in school. Something with like a very heartfelt message of acceptance, dealing with the way biology can take us sometimes.
Yeah, and bullying, abuse, being able to speak up for yourself, not judging a book by its cover. You could have so many conversations with school kids about this.
So it's really good in that respect. And one thing I really like about this movie too, and it's probably pretty obvious, but when we learn some things about it, it's very surface research, all right? Mm-hmm. So it's not like a deep dive. I've just kind of been like, oh, he's involved. Oh, this company was involved. But nothing like, I'm not reading like essays on all this shit.
You didn't go read these books.
Because I want us to have our own conclusions on it. Eraserhead, it was black and white for very specific stylistic reasons. It helped to capture the entire tone, the environment of the movie. It wasn't black and white for the sake of some retro kind of thing. It was something that made a lot of sense in that movie. But with The Elephant Man, I felt like the black and white here was, in a sense, trying to emulate a classic film.
Yes.
And I think the key to that is when it fades out, the way the scenes transition and they do these quick fade outs and they come back, it felt very much like an old movie, like the movies David Lynch grew up watching. So Frederick Treves is played by Anthony Hopkins. He goes to a freak show, but it's got this cool drawing of an elephant, or the Elephant Man, with like a part of his body is elephant, like the head and like an arm, and another is like a human. He wants to see what the Elephant Man is. He's a doctor, so he's fascinated with biological curiosity.
So he doesn't get to see him at that moment because they're kicking these folks out, Bites and the Elephant Man, and ushering all of the patrons away.
So Treves waits until after hours and he wants to go see the Elephant Man, and he has to talk Bites into it, but they go to this, it looks like it's like underground somewhere in a basement, and the Elephant Man is being kept in this like it looks like a bricked up unfinished basement. And so Bites is with this young boy. Treves pays extra, and then they take the curtain off, and it's a pretty amazing scene, which John Merrick turns around and we see what he looks like. And then the camera just slowly zooms in on Anthony Hopkins' face, and then a tear just goes down his cheek. Very powerful. He makes this deal with Bites to essentially, I guess, rent him out to do some studies and stuff.
And present in front of his colleagues about these abnormalities.
But Treves Treves is kind of going for he wants to kind of take him in more and more, but he has to negotiate with this Bites guy, and John Merrick, the Elephant Man, he's not very talkative at this point, seems to always fall back on going back to Bites.
I mean, the deal was for him to be sent back, but then Treves has done his presentation. He was very interested in John Merrick, but John Merrick went back as per the agreement. Then the little boy,
when he's with Treves kind of allows him for a little more maneuvering. Like he's keeping an eye on him, but like he can kind of come and go whenever he pleases.
Well, that's later, because the little boy comes to Treves and is like, our man is sick. You need to come help him. And when he goes back to that place for the second time, to Bites' hole in the ground, he discovers that Bites beat the shit out of John Merrick. It was as though Bites forgot that he loaned out John Merrick to the doctor, or he thought he was going to go for 30 minutes and come right back. And because he didn't come back until like the next day or later that night, he beat the holy shit out of him.
Bites is like shit-faced through half this
Bites
movie.
Is terrible. And at that point, that's when Treves says, fuck you. You don't own this man. This is a man. And I'm taking him with me, because Treves tried to say, oh, he had a fall. And so, or not Treves, Bites tried to say he had a fall. And Treves is like, oh yeah, that's a really bad fall, which I'm now going to take him to the hospital to treat him for.
Yeah. So he takes him in, and he also has this constant case of bronchitis, which, and his sickness and his physical and, his bronchial sickness is a big reason why he justifies taking him in, and they put him in this hospital in the top attic space. Like, this poor guy had to climb steps. Did they have like an elevator back then?
I guess not. I thought about elevators too, but they have him in the isolation ward.
Yeah, but only because he could freak people out.
And because Treves snuck him in. But the guy who's sort of the manager of the hospital sees it and eventually agrees that this is where John Merrick needs to be.
Now, Merrick has something, it doesn't really get into the specifics, but I'd read he's got something called like Protean syndrome or something, where he's got like all these growths, like tumorous growths all over his body. It's malformed his skeleton and his skull, and he's and he's very vulnerable to bronchitis and stuff like that, which they do help to cure that. And he can't really walk right. His spine is bent, and he cannot lay down to sleep. It will, because of the weight of his head, it will suffocate him.
He'll essentially choke.
And so he sleeps sitting up, which sounds fucking miserable. Everyone's like freaks out, and like they send a nurse up, and he doesn't really prepare her for what she's going to see.
Excuse me. The elephant.
And it's been said a lot, because this is a pretty well-regarded movie about John Hurt's performance here. And he's covered in all this stuff, right? Also, this movie created the best makeup effects category for the Oscars.
Oh, amazing.
Because there wasn't one when this movie came out. It was nominated for a lot of Academy Awards.
Like 8, I think.
And then everyone was like, how is there not a makeup award? Because this movie would just
That
take
would have
it.
been the one that they won. They didn't win any of those 8.
So it was the following Academy Awards where they came up with the best makeup and effects.
They should have gotten an honorarium.
They might. I think just the creation of the award is almost like a referendum.
For sure. At this point in the movie, everyone thinks that John Merrick is just dumb. They think that he is just an imbecile. And not in a mean way, but Treves says to I can't remember his name, but the gentleman that is the hospital manager, he says, well, he's dumb. At least I hope he is. Because the idea is that the things that this man has been through and the way people react to him, like if he can understand that, if he can take that in, that must be like living in a prison in your own body. And that is exactly what is happening, because as he starts to work with him, at first, he really thinks he's just teaching him to repeat things so that he can appear to be able to talk to people.
Well, it's coming down to where they're constantly going back and forth of whether he needs to be in this hospital. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the board members of the hospital kind of see it like they want people that they can fix.
Yes.
And to have this guy hanging around, it just kind of looks like it's like he just has an apartment there, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And which is kind of true. So some people are against that. And they don't know anything more about him than what they've studied. So Treves goes up in this sense of desperation, begging him to communicate with him. And he's like, if you understand me, nod. And he nods. And then he has him repeat things after him.
Like, my name is John Merrick. It's nice to meet you. Things that, you want someone to say to someone else to show that they're polite and know what they're doing. This
scene is really great because, John Hurt is sitting there propped up in the bed, and I noticed this very small action where Treves is getting a little more enthusiastic because he realizes he can speak.
Hello, my name is John Merrick.
Hello, my name is John Merrick.
You can't speak.
And he realizes that he can understand him enough. And John Hurt does this little thing where when Anthony Hopkins is kind of talking to him and he seems to be more focused into him, where he does this kind of like jump. Like the way he uses his body is unreal here. The way he walks, but that small bit where his body just kind of jumps at the enthusiasm of Treves. And he can talk the whole time. Hell, he can recite whole biblical verses and psalms.
That's how they figure out.
And because the reason he never talked is because he was too scared to. With Bite, he didn't want to seem too smart. Bites probably knew he could talk. But
he beat it out of him.
Yeah, he doesn't want him to be the guy who can, like, be very intelligent. He wants him to be the animal.
Because if other people know that this person is extremely intelligent, turns out, then Bites is doing something terrible. If Bites says he's subhuman, which is what Bites was doing, saying that he's a beast and not a man, then he justifies it to himself.
So he brings up the head of the hospital, Treves does, and he has him repeat what he says to him, but the head of the hospital knows that it seems like a rehearsed thing, and he's not that convinced, but as they exit Merrick's room and they start arguing, they can hear him reciting psalms, like, loudly. And then they go back in.
Tell me, how did you know the rest of it, the 23rd Psalm? I used to read the Bible every day. I know it very well, and the Book of Common Prayer. 23rd Psalm's beautiful. It's my favorite.
And he's like, I've read the Bible several times.
Yeah, I used to read it every single day. That is when they really start having conversations. That's when he tells him, I've just been scared.
So he becomes more of a gentleman.
And they take him out of isolation and give him rooms downstairs. And he gets a suit.
Yeah.
And he starts making friends in society. And these nurses are still a little afraid of him, but becoming more used to him. And
yeah.
The head of the nurses at first is very gruff with him. Mm. She takes offense to this later because she did take care of him, but she didn't give him any credit for understanding what was going on. And she was just very like, lay down, get up, don't do this, just talking to him as though he were a tiny child. And she comes to really love him and be like a mother figure to him. He's in these rooms, and this famous theater actress reads an article about him in the paper.
Played by Anne Bancroft, yeah.
Reading about him, she's, tearing up and saying, I want to meet this person. And she does. She goes and she visits him and she brings him a photo. And there was this undertone, and I know it wasn't real, but she was the right age to where she could have been his mother.
I want you to know I don't go about giving my picture to just anyone.
Oh, no, I wouldn't think it. Oh, it's beautiful. You're so... Well, I should put it in a place of honor. Next to my mother.
He's only like 20 years old in this movie.
He's like 21, yeah.
Anne Bancroft plays it so well because she first sees him and you can tell that she's being polite, but she can't really maintain to look at him. She has to kind of build herself up to have this consistent conversation with him. And she gives him a book of Shakespeare, and he starts reading from Romeo and Juliet, and then she recites it back to him. And then that's when she makes that connection that he has a passion for arts and understanding and literature, and how he's actually a very thoughtful, intelligent person. So that takes away her, you could say, natural discomfort, and then she breaks through it in the process of this whole scene.
It's interesting that you read it that way, because that is not how I read it. I didn't read it as her being uncomfortable. I read it as her heartbreaking. She is the one that I connected with the most, because she goes in, and I didn't feel that she felt uncomfortable or out of place or had to like get used to looking at him. It was more like she came in with this like open heart of, I want to meet this person and I'm going to accept him no matter what he looks like. When she would turn away, there would be like tears in her eyes. And to me, she is just one of those like emotions on your shoulder, theater people who's so good at what she does because she can tap into all of this. But seeing him and just even the thought of the life that he has had is like killing her. you know? And so it's not that it's like she's uncomfortable being around him. It's like she almost can't take how much she feels for him.
I think there's not much difference between the notion of the pity and the discomfort. I think it could feel she wants to just treat him like he's normal, but she has to turn away. I think it's not a discomfort like, oh, I think he's horrid, but she's having to adjust to him, and she has to get over that pity feeling for him.
For sure.
I think it's not that different. There's also this dude that is able to sneak people in. Let me tell you, you don't want to look different around the commoners because they're really mean. See, the people with money, they'll just they'll be nice to your face, and then they'll leave and in their house talk about how you'd probably be better if you were just put down. But the commoners, they'll come around and say exactly what they think of you right to your face.
Yeah.
And this guy keeps sneaking in and bringing people in. And these are the people that come in to gawk at him are the most Lynchian type characters. Because, you know, in David Lynch movies, he has his characters like speak in very specific ways. And there are a few scenes, like at the start of this movie, is like this image flashback of the lore of what happened to his mother, because Mr. Bites at the carnival barker makes up this story about how his mother was struck down to death by an elephant. So that's kind of what we see at the very beginning, but it's done in this like, and it's got that like ambient industrial sound that exists in these David Lynch movies as well.
And like the tracking movements where when she's moving, it's like, it's very kind of blurry and dreamlike.
But we get into the performances of Hopkins and Merrick and stuff, and it is just played as though to their more classical sensibilities. They don't have these very specific dialogues that you often find in Lynch movies. Then you get the rabble-rousing drunk common folk coming in to gawk at them, and they're extremely over the top, and they're all like pawing all over each other, and they are just completely insane. More animalistic than the man that they're all coming to go see, pointedly so. Well, Bites gets word of this little side operation this guy has. Bites comes up to see him, and then the scene fades out, and Merrick is gone, and he's made such amazing progress at this point. Like, they gave him a nice suit. He cleans up nice.
He's been building this cardboard replica of a cathedral that he could only see the top of, but he has imagined what the whole thing looks like, and he's so careful and specific and talented. He spends his time reading and creating things. He is an intellectual artist. Very
crafty. Yeah. Well, we see he and Bites are in like Belgium or something in a carnival. He's back to where he started. But
I think they were speaking French at one point too.
But Merrick is very sick and Bites is very drunk. And he drags Merrick into like a baboon cage and leaves him there. But all the other circus freaks are there, and it's actually a very sweet scene because Bites goes and passes out somewhere, and then they get Merrick out of there, and they help him get out of town and get on a ship to go back into London.
Luck, my friend. Luck. And who needs it more than we?
And that's what he does, but Merrick comes... When he arrives in the city, he's kind of on his own. So, of course, the folks around him are like... And he walks around with like a bag over his head with one eye that he can see good out of. So everyone's just curious about him. And they rip his thing off.
It starts with like some dumb kid being like, why's your head so big? Why's your head so big?
And then all these people start to follow. I mean, he's something of a celebrity, especially in the London area, because... his story is featured in the papers and stuff. That's how these other celebrities got to know him. He even gets a visit from like the Princess of Wales and shit, and actually gets hospital funding and a permanent stay due to that. So these people corner him in like the latrines. And this is a pretty infamous scene for this movie where he screams,
I am not an animal! I am a human being!
It's very powerful, and then the police come in.
And they know who he is.
Yeah, they know who he is because he is a celebrity, and he ends up back at the hospital. Everyone's very happy to see him. So they kind of get him going, and he goes to the theater for the first time. Very, very heart-tugging scene here where they do a performance, and then they give ode to him in the audience, and they have him stand up so people can see him. So he gets a standing ovation because this is his first time attending the theater.
But they're actually like honoring him. It's the first time that he has been in front of people in that way, that they have not been either like gawking at him or jeering at him, because he doesn't stand up at first. And Treves says they want to see you. They just want to see who you are. And it's beautiful, and he's so happy.
So they go back to his room and they have a conversation with him and get a little choked up talking about it.
Yeah, he keeps, he calls Treves my friend all the time. Like, he almost punctuates every sentence with that. But he's talking about, it's so sweet because it's kind of a fairy tale that they see. And when it starts on their conversation, he goes, I didn't know if the troll would ever get out of the cave. Like, he is so intelligent, but he does also have this like extreme naivete because he's never actually been to school. He's never really had true life experiences. Yeah. And so
there's a social stagnation there that has held him back, but there is something about the intelligence of someone who spends so much time alone that they just read and read and read and absorb all this information. And like the amount of imagination he probably has is incalculable.
They talk about how they will go again to the theater, and they've already said when he wasn't around that he is dying. So when he was sick, he's not going to get better. We know that, but no one has said that to him, I don't think.
I think they predict like a few more years at most.
He thanks Treves for everything that Treves has done for him. And Treves says, and it's so interesting because the way he says it is not eloquent and almost falls flat after the beautiful words that Merrick has said, because he just goes, and you've helped me too. You know, like he doesn't know what to say because he does feel so much for this person. And he has become like this famous doctor because of this. And I love earlier in the movie, he questions that. Like to his wife, he's like, am I just the same as Bites? Am I just a bad person? He says to him, don't ever feel bad for me. Say this. Don't ever feel bad for me.
Mr. Treves, don't worry about me, my friend. I am happy every hour of the day. My life is full because I know that I am loved. Again to myself.
And then Treves leaves and he goes over to his cathedral. He had to rebuild it because when he got kidnapped, it got destroyed. So he has rebuilt. So he's been back for a little while, and he goes over to it and he picks up a brush and he signs his name so we know he's finished with it. And there's this picture in his room that he looks at all the time, and it's this little boy sleeping, and he's talked to Treves about how he wishes he could just sleep. He just wishes he could lay down. And this is when I just like couldn't stop crying at this point. And he looks at that picture, and then he takes all the pillows off his bed because he's got this mountain of pillows because he has to sit up. And he takes them all off, and he like pulls the sheets back, and he's touching the bed as though it's like the best thing he's ever seen. Sorry. And he gets in bed and he lays back and he dies. And he knows that he will. But in that moment, it's like he couldn't imagine being happier.
Yeah.
And he just wants, that's the one more thing he wants, is to lay down and rest.
There's another movie that is said to play it kind of a lot more accessible that David Lynch made. It's a movie called The Straight Story, which we haven't seen, and I've been wanting to see it a long time. But it's a story about, it's got Harry Dean Stanton and Sissy Spacek in it, and it's a story of a man who needs to go see his brother who's dying. But they have, I haven't seen the movie, but he has to drive his lawnmower, and it's based on a true story, like this story. Huh. And And he drives a lawnmower all the way across a state or more to go see his brother. That's what the movie's about. Also based on a true story, so I can imagine it's and that movie's also very well regarded, but very lesser known compared to other David Lynch works and in general.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard of it, and I really want to see it now just off what you just said, but I didn't even know that existed.
But it's just kind of wild how, like, this very sentimental human story that isn't over saccharine, but is very executed very smartly, how it seems very easy for him to pull that off, but he chooses to go. But it's the Twin Peaks, the Blue Velvets, the Mulholland Drives is what he really is driven to do. He can make some of the most tear-jerking shit you've ever seen, and occasionally he does. The balance here is perfect.
It is.
And it helps with some great performances by Anthony Hopkins and John Hurt. I mean, it's been said over and over how great John Hurt and how his physical acting is just such a sight to behold in this movie. Like, and a perfect example of how no one can, you don't have, like, being an actor is more about just people seeing your face. It's about what you do with your entire self.
Yes, good actors act with their whole body.
And he does. And these small motions, these moments, even when he's just confused and when he's just scared, it's just so apparent. Even with the fact that due to the deformity and the makeup, he only appears to have one expression, but you know that when he feels love, it's true. You know when he feels fear, it's true. There's no doubt about it whatsoever. Pretty amazing movie. 1 through 5.
This is an S tier.
Yes, The Elephant Man by David Lynch from 1980 is an S tier movie, sharing that rank with other great films such as The Battle of Algiers, Terminator 2, The Last Picture Show, The Killing, The Invisible Man, Singing in the Rain, Stalker, Sunset Boulevard. One of David Lynch's favorite movies. It's at least as good as those, if not better. Why we do the show, when we talk about it, it helps to kind of maintain a permanence in our memory for these movies. Because throughout our lives, I mean, we've watched plenty of movies before we did the show. Sometimes it goes in one ear and out the other. And after maybe a couple of decades, if you haven't seen something since then you pretty much haven't seen it, right?
Yeah.
But when we talk about it, it really brings out our emotions and makes us kind of realize things about it that maybe we didn't even see as we were watching it. The Elephant Man is just good fucking movies, highly recommended. And it's pretty family friendly too. There you go. It's that movie. Tomorrow we do our last of David Lynch's first 3, and it is the first ever adaptation of Frank Herbert's sci-fi film that a lot of directors have had a hard time over the years, up until Denis Villeneuve shows up adapting this movie or this story. But we're talking about David Lynch's Dune, 1984. Come back tomorrow. Until then,
2 cookies and a Coke.
I wish to dedicate, the whole company wishes to dedicate with all their hearts, tonight's performance to Mr. John Merrick, my very dear friend.
Thank you for watching The Projectors. Click the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. We are available on YouTube and podcast. You can also support the show by liking, leaving comments, reviewing, sharing, and never questioning Bob when he claims that certain characters in movies are like autism. We love you. Goodbye.